Friends, you know that I personally love factories, and a diorama in this setting was bound to happen sooner or later. But what if my working space was extremely limited, and I mean no factory walls in the background, just the floor and a few random items? Let's check it out. The diorama will feature this oxide primer Ferdinand from my previous video, and it'll be directly inspired by the historical images of this vehicle. I also have a leftover mantlet from the model, and in the past I bought a set of these wooden crates from Mini Art. I also bought a couple of figures which will give some life to the scene. But first, let's make the basic layout of the diorama. I wanted everything to be as compact as possible because I don't have much space left in my display cabinet, and I also wanted the focus to be primarily on the Ferdinand. The scene around it is basically just a stage for the model. I wanted to include a few interesting elements that would break up the monotony of the floor, and these were also inspired by the historical images. Now, the floor is made up of cobblestones. Nowadays, all factory floors are made from poured concrete, but back in the day, this was the way to go. It's a pretty monotonous job to carve them into the foam, but check out how I composed everything at an angle compared to the edges of the base, and how nothing in the scene is centered. One of the greatest advantages of styrofoam is flexibility and softness, and as such, it can be easily sculpted with a pencil. I used toothpicks in the past, but graphite is slippery and smooth, which makes the job much quicker. But still, if you plan on making the entire base made of stones, it'll take you several hours. One of the best hacks that you've been telling me about for the longest time, and I kept ignoring it for the longest time, is texturing with a crumbled ball of baking foil. This is absolutely fantastic, and I wish I listened to this advice much sooner. You might have noticed that I did something to the foam with some kind of primer, and in fact, it's just paint. A random Tamiya acrylic, thick, undiluted, straight from the jar. You see, not every foam is perfect, and some types are quite porous, such as this one. Well, fear no longer, because Tamiya acrylics can fill the texture and reinforce the styrofoam. You might need to apply 3 or 4 layers depending on how porous it is, but you'll get a very nice result, and as a bonus, the foam will become immune to enamel thinners. As for the concrete bits, acrylic wood putty or wall repair plaster are still the best tools to simulate this surface. Just like the cobblestones, this surface will also become immune against aggressive enamel thinners. It also dries very fast, so we can quickly make the texture more level with a sanding sponge, adding to that realistic look of poured concrete. Not to mention, the texture will make painting more interesting. The least fun of the entire diorama process, but no doubt one of the most important ones, is laminating the sides with thin wooden veneer. Since the scenery is completely flat, each side of the veneer is just a rectangle with no exotic shapes. So it was perfectly fine to use regular double-sided tape, which creates an instant bond. You might think that there won't be much trimming because the base is so flat, but this couldn't be further from the truth. The paved floor is slightly irregular thanks to the texturing, and to make the edges as seamless as possible, I also carved out the gaps between every tile. The tiny gap between the wood and the base had to be filled with acrylic foam putty, but we're not adding the grouting between the tiles just yet, so the putty had to be removed from these places. To be honest, this type of diorama is quite tedious to make, but hey, we'll make it work somehow. Once all of that was done, I filled and sanded the edges with oak-colored wood putty and proceeded to add the grouting. I needed some kind of fine dust for the job, with very small pebbles added for texture, and the fine earth scatter from VMS is excellent for this purpose. It's important to take our time and make sure it stays in the gaps and the rest of the surface remains clean. To make it absorb glue better, I moistened the entire surface with isopropyl alcohol, which breaks the surface tension, and then added ballast freeze from VMS. Large amounts of glue can take a while to dry, so in the meantime, let's build some crates. This is another of many useful and affordable sets from MiniArt, and the boxes, they look pretty good. However, I wanted some of them to be cut off at the edge of the diorama, so I figured it would be easier to just take the dimensions and build my own boxes from scratch. You see, on my latest building facade, I explored some exciting wood techniques and the process has become second nature to me. So I used 0.4mm evergreen sheets to build the walls, a Tamiya scriber to add the gaps between planks, a metal wire brush to add the wood grain texture, small amounts of Mr. Cement S to clean up and soften the texture, and blocks of styrofoam for the basic shape of each crate. Super glue was used to hold the walls in place, and once all the elements were done, I added holes for the nails with a 0.4mm drill bit. Now I have my own custom-made wooden crates that fit exactly how I needed them, and the backside is closed off with veneer. The figures needed some quick prep work as well. The standing debonair gentleman is 3D printed by T-Rex Studio and is beautifully detailed. The welder is a hand-sculpted figure from Royal Model, and the casting is a bit rough in some places. Luckily, it's nothing serious, and most of the flaws can be easily re-sculpted with 2-part epoxy putty. They will tell a very simple story and make the diorama more lively. Well, as I said, the scene is just a stage that puts the Oxide Red Ferdinand into context, so the stuff around the model isn't too complicated. We're gonna add some additional details, but first, let's paint what we already have. To kick things off on a positive note, I stained the wooden sides. I found that using a sponge is much better than a large paintbrush because the wood stain distribution is smoother and more even. The job is not exactly precise, and some of the stain can get on the diorama, so that's why I like to do it as the very first step. Then I base coated the floor with an airbrush. An overall coat of a dusty color is gonna be enough to unify the various surfaces and to paint the grouting between the cobblestones. Spraying away from the wooden sides eliminates any chance of overspray. That's a free life hack. Let's now focus on the concrete parts because these are seriously gonna be the only untedious part of the base. Again, taking what I learned from old building facades, I did most of the painting with sponges. These are fantastic when you need to cover a large area quickly, but more importantly, when you need to introduce some texture as well. Concrete has a grayish tone, but it's very important to use a lot of sandy and ochre colors in the process, otherwise the result would look artificial and cold. It's also worth keeping in mind that concrete will look different when it's placed outside, and this factory floor is an indoor space, so our weathering options are quite limited. A black enamel wash is another crucial part of the process, because on one hand it outlines all the details, but also enhances the texture and subtly ties the different sponged layers together. Once the enamel thinner evaporated, I added a generous amount of chipping fluid to the strip in the middle. This is not visible in the reference images, but I thought adding a yellow strip would make the whole thing more interesting, and also enhance the industrial look of the scene. The paint can get worn down in pretty unpredictable ways, but you know what? These surfaces are not known for delicate chipping. When the paint goes down, it just usually goes down in large sheets. After another subtle round of enamel washes, I treated the edges and erased portions with diluted off-white acrylic. This is basically chipping for concrete, and it's a great way of adding tons of visual detail and creating that HDR look. The tracks were made from 1.5mm white strips of evergreen plastic, and the weathering was done in the simplest way possible. A dark rusty acrylic coat followed by a thick wash of light rusty oil paint, and once it was dry, I ran the new AK acrylic marker down the middle for that polished metal look. These acrylic markers are very good and can make certain tasks infinitely easier. The dust-colored cobblestones looked pretty weird next to the finished concrete, so let's tackle them next. I think the dusty base coat, which takes care of the grouting followed by painting of the individual stones by brush, is the most efficient method, although it takes a lot of time. Color variation is also very important in my opinion, even though it's pretty common to see thousands of cobblestones with the exact same color in real life. But painting them this way is just more interesting. After all, we're trying to squeeze as much out of our hard work as possible, right? Of course, we can introduce as much variation as we want, but personally, I think everywhere between 3 and 5 different shades is more than enough. It looks so much better already, doesn't it? But we need to add some weathering and special effects. Let's start with a simple, quick acrylic dust wash. These are the same ones I used for the dust effects on the Ferdinand, and in a way they'll visually tie the model with the groundwork. I just covered the entire floor with it. Next up, let's grab a dark oil paint and add some stains with it. My basic idea is that factory floors get very dirty over time, and there's just no need or time to sweep them. Especially in heavy industry, such as in this case, the floor is bound to be covered with dust and oil. These oils, the acrylics, and pretty much everything I've used to paint the base, it's all from AK Interactive and it's amazing stuff. And if you want some of these awesome paints as well, check out my affiliate link in the description, and if you use my sales coupon, you'll get a small discount. Each purchase helps me out. And finally, for the most time-consuming part ever. Just like on the concrete, I added some light chipping around the edges. On each individual stone. If you want to know why I'm not doing another cobblestone diorama ever again, this is the answer. It took me over 5 hours to chip every single stone, but let me tell you, it was so worth it. A single painting step can make the entire floor look deeper, totally three-dimensional and HDR, and at the same time adding the signs of heavy traffic on top of the stones. Okay, you know what? As if the last few hours weren't torturous enough for my right hand, my back, and my eyesight, let's continue with figure painting. Well, the initial steps are quite simple and fun, because we're all about that zenithal pre-shading here. Personally, I can never truly appreciate a figure until it's been pre-shaded. I'm using the same method as always, and I made a very detailed separate video that explains my approach in really great detail, so go check it out if you want to know more. This time, or actually just like any other time, I'll just skim through the process because I feel like I sort of lost a bit of muscle memory with figures. Maybe because the last ones I painted were at the start of the year for the Saipan diorama. But hey, they'll serve their purpose, and I don't think they'll drag the overall quality of the diorama down too much. To make sure they'll stay in place no matter where I take this diorama, holes were carefully made in the factory floor, and the figures were superglued with metal pins still attached to their feet. Then I could add the 2 hoses that power the welding torch, and I must admit that a bystander looking at a welding job in process without a mask isn't the most plausible thing, but hey, I live in Eastern Europe and I've seen far worse. In fact, I decided to call this the busy corner of the diorama, so I added a bunch of smaller details that come from MiniArt's Field Workshop set. Let's now finish the scene with the not so busy corner, aka the large wooden crates. Oil paints are absolutely fantastic for adding the basic wooden tones in a quick, fun way. I like to spray the surface with Tamiya Flat White as a unified base coat that accepts oil paints better than bare plastic. The color choice depends heavily on how old the wood is supposed to be, so in this case, I mostly use warm, sandy tones with a bit of black-brown for variation. The process is exactly the same as an oil dot filter on scale models, just heavier. Well, even that is up to debate, because who says you can't blend the oils in a very subtle manner, leaving the white undercoat to show through? It's just that I didn't need that kind of effect so far. I like to leave them dry for at least 2 or 3 days, so the only other thing we can do before going further is a quick acrylic wash that adds a bit of random texture and initial shading. Okay, so in the meantime I was painting the figures and the busy corner, and now we can proceed with this awesomeness. I gave the wood a generous coat of VMS chipping fluid, and let me say that VMS is another brand with tons of awesome products that I love using, and you can get them as well at a better price if you use the discount codes in the video description and visit VMS or Michigan Toy Soldier. Okay, back to the awesome technique. After the fluid had dried, I brushed each plank with slightly different colors. This is where it's all up to our imagination and creativity. I decided to paint one box green, the other blue, and leave the last one in natural wooden colors. Variation is important because it usually gets toned down quite a lot at the end. Once again, the paint can chip in pretty large sheets, but that's actually great because that's exactly how it happens on real wood. And the wood grain texture helps us achieve those realistic results big time. The same method can be applied to the raw, unpainted wood. Just different yellowish sandy tones chipped on top of the oil paint base coat for added variation and texture. The boxes from Mini Art come with lots of beautiful decals, and these can elevate our work to a whole new level. I sprayed this area with Tamiya gloss varnish beforehand to help with adhesion, and then sprayed it again with VMS flat varnish. A black enamel wash will tie everything together and provide contrast and subtle weathering at the same time. I know that some people might find my use of very dark washes a bit too much, but when you're separating individual planks from each other, black is really the best way to go, and neutral tones work best for aging wooden surfaces. Finally, I highlighted the edges of each plank with a very pale sandy mixture, which not only enhances the contrast and creates that HDR look, but also adds the illusion of wear, especially on the decal and even more noticeably on the ends of the planks. These are all simple methods, but the results are so exciting. Which one of these boxes is your favorite? Mine is definitely the one in the raw wooden finish, because trying to imitate fresh, clean wooden planks is something I haven't done so far. Anyway, it was time to glue my custom boxes to my custom diorama in a very custom way, and once they and the Ferdinand were firmly held in place, my mission was over. This concludes my easygoing summer project for this year. Last year I picked the modern German Puma APC as a simple summer build, and it turned into one of the most complex models I've done. This diorama, it was alright. I mean, the Ferdinand was really fun because I did a straightforward build, and the painting was very exciting because of the oxide primer and the black and white pre-shading. I knew the diorama had to be simple with no factory walls behind the tank because I wanted the model to be visible from every angle. The chalk markings are just too cool to be hidden behind the wall, you know. And apart from the boxes that I had bought for this model a few years ago, everything else was sort of made up on the fly, and it sure felt like that. Not gonna lie, if this wasn't my job, but just a hobby, I'd probably give up and leave the model without the base. But I think it doesn't look that bad in the end. If nothing else, at least it was a good way to practice and showcase a few exciting techniques for the cobblestones and wood. My next project will be a civilian subject, which will incorporate my miniature facades into the diorama world, basically getting the most out of both. But until then, I want to sincerely thank every single one of you for watching these videos, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be building models for a living, and I can't thank you enough for this amazing opportunity. All of this is also possible thanks to my incredible patrons. My whole Patreon page is like a Night Shift magazine subscription, as I post there pretty often. And you'll get updates from my workbench where I share my thoughts and insights. We can get in touch through DMs, comments and emails. I'm posting 1 week early ad-free videos and those stay there forever, so you can always get back to them. I also have some small extra goodies such as 3D models which you can use for detailing your projects, a bunch of real-life references for nature, old buildings and so on. And last but not least, these high-resolution studio photos which show the diorama in more detail than video ever could. It will help me a lot, but no pressure. Anyway, the civilian diorama that I'm gonna build next is something I've been planning for roughly a year, when I found some exciting photos from a city in the UK. Not gonna give you any more spoilers, but it's gonna be fun, and we'll start with the vehicle, and the diorama will be another separate video. So until then, be nice to one another, take care of each other, build your models, don't just collect them, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!
Než táto ponožka tuto není asi úplne najlepšie. A musí prejsť auto. Dobrý. Friends, you know that I love Išiel som povedať dioramas. You know that I personally love factories, and a diorama in one was bound to happen sooner or... Dobre, teraz už ideme naozaj. Friends, you know that I love...